Steve, our guest speaker, is W1SRD. So I asked Steve for some information, some bio information. Steve told me he's a past president of the Northern California Contesters Club. He's in the Motherlode DX and Contesting Club. He's in the El Dorado County Amateur Radio Club. He's in the Northern California DX Club. He's an active DX expeditioner. He's an avid contester. He's a DXer working towards his top of the honor row. You're up to what, 335, or have you increased that?
336, but it's not confirmed.
Not confirmed. Okay, so 335 confirmed, 336 pending. He's actively involved in ARES. He's an officer in what's called the Critical Emergency Response Association, CERA. He enjoys station building. So I have one question for you, Steve. What do you do with all your spare time?
Pour concrete like you.
Okay, good. A good answer. Anyway, with that, I'd like to welcome Steve. Come on up. Turn the microphone over to Steve. Thank you again.
Thank you, Graydon. One quick plug. He mentioned CERA, the Community Emergency Radio Association, and we're actually really proud of that in El Dorado County, and I hope that it starts to spread. But it's not amateur radio directly. It really is about sponsoring the GMRS repeater system we've built in El Dorado County to support the neighborhood, or we call it the Neighborhood Radio Watch, but it's also associated with hopefully associated with fire safe councils. So the idea is we've built this network of repeaters around the county to allow GMRS users to get near real-time information about fires and share it amongst themselves. It's not intended to supplant 911 or any law enforcement agencies or CAL FIRE or anybody else like that, but it's to provide that alternate form of communication when the cell towers have gone down, like we saw in Paradise. So just want to get that plug in there about what that's about. And a lot of people put in a lot of time, not just myself, but a whole bunch of other people, and it's a really cool system. And it's proving to be a really good gateway drug into ham radio. So we've got a lot of the GMRS users that have gotten really interested and then become licensed amateurs as well. So hopefully that program spreads. I know they're working on it down in Amador. I don't know if Placer's done any of that yet, but Caldor was a super huge mover to get people involved in that. I think we have over 500 neighborhood radio watch users now. So and 5 or 6 repeaters. It's turned into a pretty big system. So with that, let's talk about DXpeditioning. How many of you have worked at DXpedition? Not just ours, but any DXpedition. How many of you would consider yourself a DX'er? Okay, tough crowd. Hopefully I can get you excited about DXing and DXpeditions with this. I will try to avoid lingo and terminology that may not be familiar. If you have a question, please interrupt, raise your hand. Graydon has been tasked with throwing spitwads at me if I say stuff that I need to clarify.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We have had a technical breakdown.
Yes, sir.
And you've never had this happen on a DX?
Never.
May I restart the computer and give you a moment to take a drink of water, and we'll be right back?
By all means, reboot.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that.
One of my jobs when I was working was I was in pre-sales for a software company. Thank you. Similar situation. We're doing a big demo for a company. I wasn't doing the demo. Unfortunately, I was observing. Another guy was doing the demo, and his computer. He'd done something wrong. I don't remember what he did, but he had to reboot in the middle of the demo. The VP of sales was in the room, beside himself, literally beside himself. Walked out cursing this guy's name, saying he's going to get fired.
Please don't fire me.
Enough said.
We're coming back up. So if you have any good jokes or...
That was it. That was the only thing that pops to mind.
Steve?
Yes, sir.
Thinking about DXing, FT8 would qualify for that, right?
Absolutely. FT8 is a very important part of DXing these days. And the reason is because FT8 as a mode allows you to work with compromised antennas, not giant beams. You can use pretty much a piece of wire hanging out the window. It allows you to use lower power than you might be able to, and the DXpedition can still hear you working. So I think it's been a real powerful enabler. In fact, I will talk a lot about FTAs in this and how it's, in a very short period of time, changed what we do on the other end of the, on the transmitting end of the expedition, relative to mode choices and band choices and things like that. So it's been really important. I like your call, by the way, too.
2 more questions and we'll be there.
2 more questions. Yes, sir.
Can you talk more about the CERA system? We're able to get more information about that.
Well, we have the CERA webmaster right here, and the URL is CERA.org.
CERA Fund, F-U-N-D.
CERAFUND, CERAFund.org. Because CERA itself is really is the nonprofit arm of it. It's the fundraising arm. So that's why we called it CERA Fund. But yeah, right now most of the equipment's been donated. We're using GMRS standard frequencies, but as part of the fundraising activities, we want to be able to buy licensed GRMS frequencies. It'll still be the GRMS bands, but it'll be the business type licenses, and that way we can get out of the way of a lot of the people who are just using FRS and other stuff like that. It was actively used during mosquito fire because one of the repeaters is at Coloma and covers Georgetown really well. So a lot of the Georgetown folks were using it very actively to keep tabs on what was happening because they were already having some cell phone failures over there, as I'm sure they did on the Placer side of the line as well. So,
All right. Back to the podium and
We're back.
pretend nothing ever happened.
nothing. These are not the problems we're seeking.
So back to DXpeditioning. I've been on a few of them. As a kid, when I first got licensed at 13 and worked some of my first DX, I thought, I want to go to an uninhabited South Pacific island someday and do ham radio. And I finally got to do that a few years back. The first few expeditions I went on were with large teams, with big funding, and by big funding, these expeditions are getting incrementally more expensive year by year. The last one I went on, which I'm wearing the shirt for, which was to Orkney, South Orkney Island, which is in the close to Antarctica. The budget for that was around $350,000. So these are getting to be very expensive trips. There's a group that's getting prepared to go to a place called Raivavae Island, which is, I think, the most rare, other than North Korea. North Korea is number 1, Raivavae is number 2. The budget for that one's going to run close to $1 million. Now, these are very remote, very difficult places to get to. Raivavae is especially dangerous to get on and off the island. Orkney was not easy, but I think it was incrementally much safer because we're in a sheltered harbor. But nonetheless, these are getting to be big time operations that cost a whole lot of money, that require a lot of fundraising and a lot of stuff that you wouldn't necessarily associate with radio itself. Logistics, fundraising, all the other stuff that goes on with any kind of big project. I decided not to talk about any of those. I'm going to talk about one we did this past spring that was not a lot of those things. It was kind of a much different type of DXpedition. Instead of taking a ship to an uninhabited island and storming the beach and hauling generators and tents and all the other stuff you have to do, we decided to fly in and stay in a resort. It's kind of resort. Stay in a place that had beds, running water, showers, and fed us. And instead of going alone with a bunch of guys, we decided we're going to bring our significant others. And so it's a very different kind of DXpedition, but at the same time, we were very serious about the radio we did. And we did a lot of logistical things that made it a real DXpedition. But I wanted to talk about it tonight because it's a very different color of DXpedition. And I think it's one that's way more accessible to a larger number of people to think about, and something you could do yourself. I'll talk more about this picture on the lead-in. This is one of the, actually interesting, they're native to the island, but they had left the island and moved to France, and they just happened to be back visiting family. And who took the picture, Doris? Liz, one of the other YLs, took the picture of this daughter on her father's shoulders. We just thought it was just one of the most charming pictures we'd seen in a long time because the look on the girl's face is priceless. And that's the QSL card. So that's the QSL card we sent out to all the people that requested QSL cards. The group that I was fortunate to get affiliated with It's called the Perseverance DX Group, and it was a group that was formed to do DXpeditions. It's a limited liability corporation. Again, talking about all the kind of the overhead that goes into doing these kinds of activities these days. That group has done 4 really major expeditions. One to Mellish Reef, to Chesterfield, to Ducie Island, and to South Orkney. I did the last 3. I did my first DXpedition to my dream South Pacific uninhabited island was here in Chesterfield Reef. Then we did another South Pacific to Ducie Island, which is another uninhabited island down by Pitcairn, and then to South Orkney, which is really cold. Those were all incredible trips, and I would be happy to give a talk on any of them if you'd like someday. So why did we pick going to the Austral Islands? First of all, the Austral Islands is part of French Polynesia, just FYI. I'll give you some geography about that. We were looking for a project. We had just finished Orkney when COVID hit, and we also wanted to go someplace warm because we were really tired of being cold. And the Australs are very nice. And French Polynesia was one of the first countries to open up post-COVID to tourism, which was very fortuitous timing. Why the Australs? The Australs are part of French Polynesia, but they represent a separate DXCC entity in the the record of entities, the 340 active ones today, because it's far enough away from the main islands of Tahiti and the kind of the central government. There's a bunch of rules around DXCC that I won't bore you with, but Australs qualify. And why and where is it? I don't know if you've ever looked at a world map of French Polynesia, but geographically, it covers an area larger than the United States in the Pacific Ocean, but it's just a ton of these scattered islands all over. So it covers around that splotch on the map, and then it's all these islands. And Marquesas is another DXCC entity. There happens to be an expedition there right this minute if you wanted to get on and work them. TX5N, I believe. That's on the northeast side of the French Polynesia. We were down here on kind of the southwest side, south central side. It's about, I think I say it anyway, it says, 600 kilometers, 373 miles south of Tahiti, the main island. The island we went to is called Raivavae. At least that's how we've learned to pronounce it. It's pronounced seemingly many different ways. It was a 2-hour flight and a turboprop from Tahiti. So we flew from San Francisco to Papeete, which is on the main island. Then we waited a day or two and caught a flight from there to Raivavae. We stayed at a place called the Tama Raivavae Inn, which you'll see some pictures of. Calling it a resort is a bit of a stretch, but it was very comfortable, and we were very well fed by the owner. The Australs are not particularly rare. I mean, there's been plenty of expeditions gone there. But at the moment we went, it had climbed back up to number 63 on the most wanted list. So I don't know how many of you use Club Log or have seen Club Log, but they maintain a running list of the most wanted entities on the planet. And so as DXpedition planners, we look at that frequently because the more wanted it is, the more attention you're going to get, the more activity, and so on, and it's just more fun. People really want to work you. And when we went, it had climbed back up, like I said, about number 63, which is pretty far up for a place that you can fly into. The island itself is actually quite small. I was looking for it had square miles. It doesn't have any. It's just a few miles by a few miles. It's a relatively small island. The native population is only about 900 people that live there full time. There's no hospital. There's a clinic with a nurse. There's no restaurants. I wouldn't say it's primitive because it's got full-time electricity, paved roads, the whole 9 yards. It's just a very, very different lifestyle, and it's all pretty much the self-sustenance, self-taking care of themselves. And a lot of families that have been there since French Polynesia, I mean, they can trace their roots all the way back to some of the original settlers of the island. I didn't put the slide set together. Gene K5GS usually does our slide sets, and he always loves to include the climate because it varies a lot. But with Raivavae, it's really easy. It's nice. It's just pretty much nice all the time. Who went with us? I told you there was a group of us. It was 5 couples. Of the 5 couples, 9 of us were hams, right? Yeah, 9 of us had licenses, and 7 operated in total, I think. Yeah, 7 operated. It was a group of people that we've all gone on trips before, so we knew each other pretty much. It was Doris. You can see her featured up there. Walt from the Bay Area. Rob and Melanie are a couple from Washington/Arizona. We invited one international member, Haya from Germany, who's been on a couple trips with us. He is a superb CW operator and has the patience and tolerance to work European pilots, which I will tell you is a special skill. Gene and myself, and the reason we included this picture is, you can't see it from back there, but right there is my pet gecko that had visited me that evening and crawled up. As I was sitting there running the pileup, had sit there and crawled up the computer and was perched there keeping an eye on what I was doing. So that was pretty funny. Everywhere you go, just about, if it's not what they call a CEPT country, or if you want to get a custom license, which most of the time you do want to get a custom license, we wanted something that would be unique. We requested TX5N and we got it. You have to go through the paperwork in the country, but French Polynesian, the French are very easy to work with. We got our license very quickly. Now, I'd mentioned logistics, and again, you know, if you're planning almost any activity, and especially if you're planning activity of this kind of scale, there's going to be logistics. We got together and we decided that we didn't want to carry a bunch of stuff on the aircraft for a couple reasons. One is excess baggage fees are just ridiculously expensive. And second, we wanted to take more stuff than made sense because we really wanted to take some good antennas. We wanted to take some big high-powered amplifiers so we'd make it easy for people to hear us. It makes it more fun for us. It makes it more fun for everybody. So we gathered at Walt's place in the Bay Area, and we put together all of our gear. Luckily, we still had all of the stuff still in storage from the prior expedition, so I didn't have to do a lot of IT stuff, but I usually do the IT stuff. Pulled it all out of storage, checked it out, updated it, and we packed it up, and we ended up with 2 pallets with a bunch of Pelican cases and this 4x8 crate, which we ended up shipping via air freight to French Polynesia. Turned out to be about 600 kilograms or 1,000 pounds of stuff. And what was the bill for the bill was insane because remember, we're just coming off of COVID and they were talking about how much freight was. I think we ended up paying something ridiculous like $10,000 to ship it back and forth. It was just insane. We didn't pay that much to ship an entire cargo or container down to South America to go to the Antarctic. French Polynesia, beautiful place if you've never been there. Most people, you have to fly into Papeete. Papeete is where you stop and then you get on a plane and you go somewhere nice. No, I shouldn't knock Papeete. It's fine. There's plenty of stuff to do there, but I mean, it really is just the transit point. It is kind of the commercial center of the French Polynesia. Yeah, I won't bore you with a lot of the stuff. Equipment, what did we take? Well, we ended up taking quite a bit of stuff for the fact that we were only setting up 2 stations. And a lot of that's because we wanted backups. We didn't want stuff to fail on us. And one of the guys is this inveterate collector of high-powered amplifiers, and he wanted to test a couple amplifiers. And so we ended up taking this newer British design one down, and he also wanted to take a Flex PGXL, which is a full 1.5 kW solid state amp. So we had a lot of stuff. Our go-to rig for DXpeditions is still the Elecraft K3. Size, weight, and capability, it's really hard to beat for what it is, and there's really nothing out there that beats it yet. Antenna-wise, we want to have a lot of good antennas. We've had really good success in the past with what are called VDAs, or vertical dipole arrays, and you'll see some pictures of those. They're single-band antennas, but they work like gangbusters when you're close to the water. In fact, almost any vertical works like gangbusters when you're close to the water. We also took we also took a hex beam, so that we would have a variety of polarization. So when you're running 2 stations, you want to try to avoid as much cross-station interference as possible. And one way you help that is you have one horizontally polarized, and you have one vertically polarized. You get about 15 dB of isolation just from that. So that's one of the reasons why we took the hex beam. It worked out really well. And then we had a step IR for some of the low band stuff. And then we took a giant spider pole, 30 meter spider pole that we were going to use for 160 meters. So we had a lot of antennas, you see in the pictures. A little more background about French Polynesia. This is our hostess, by the way, standing by one of the few remaining, I'm going to say totem, but I know that's not the right word, of the original, and I wouldn't even call it a religion as much as their belief system. But when thank you. When the missionaries came, they destroyed most of these, and this is one of the few remaining ones. The island, like I said, is this is not a primitive place, and I hope I didn't lead you to believe that earlier. The people there are very proud of it. They take very good care of their homes. They take very good care of the island, and it's a lot of work because the island's continually wanting to take itself back over with vegetation. Very house proud, and it's very beautiful. It's exactly what you would envision in your mind when you said, I want to go to a remote tropical island. It's exactly that, with the wildlife and with the vegetation. Except for that poor guy. That's not a native. He's a future dinner. But I don't know why Gene included that particular picture with me, but that's where we stayed. It's called the Pension Raivavae Tama. And if you've ever traveled for Europe, you've probably run across the concept of a pension. It's kind of in between staying with somebody's guest house and a motel. But it usually includes at least one meal. We did a deal with her where we got 3 meals, which was really nice. And they've hosted hams before, so they knew they knew the whole gig. I mean, they knew what to do. It's in a place called Antonio Village. It's on the north side of the island, which is really ideally situated to set up a ham station, since if you look at the Great Circle Path from the Australs, everything's pretty much just north. We didn't have to worry about aiming the beam. You just point it north and you're done. And that covered from JA all the way to Europe and the United States. We were next to this church, and that's the pension runs right through here, and then there's some places on the beach that you can't see covered by the vegetation. That's where we actually had the shack, and a few people stayed, and we put the antennas out on that strip of beach. I'll go ahead and divert and tell a little story here. This is the front of the pension. It's the little local market. It's owned by the daughter of the owners of the pension, and it stocks, depending on what's available, because they only get a ship comes in every 2 weeks. What's available on the shelves is just what you'd expect to see in a local market. But one thing we couldn't figure is there was people that sat on that bench almost 24 hours a day. And when I say 20, I am not kidding, because I would get up to go do a radio shift at 3 a.m., and there's people sitting on that bench at 3 a.m. We're thinking, what the heck are people doing at 3 a.m.? And this all ties back to needing to transmit your logs up during a DXpedition, because people always want to know if they're in the log. And if they don't find that they're in the log, they're going to work you again and again and again. And one of the banes of being a DXpedition is people duping you. You don't want to get duped. So we thought we were really smart. We went to all this effort when we were at Papeete. We go buy these 4G cards that we're going to put in our phones, and we're going to get great cell service when we get on the island. We get to the island, it doesn't work worth anything. In fact, we can't even send a single email. So we're struggling to upload logs, and then finally we figure out what people are doing is they're sitting there using the internet that the woman who owns that market sells. And her internet is blazing fast. And it's the exact same company we bought our SIM cards from. So we finally talked to the owner, and she said, oh yeah, go talk to my daughter, she'll fix you up. So we go talk to her and say, here's what we need. She said, give me $10. We'd probably spent $400 buying SIM cards at Papeete, and then we had blazing fast internet. We had to go sit on that bench, but it just goes to show it's who you know. I thought that was really funny. The churches form, and there's 4 churches on the entire island. The churches form the backbone of their social structures. And it's not because they're especially religious, it's because they form they're just a central point for the islanders to get together. We happen to be there Easter weekend, and they make a big deal out of Easter. They all get dressed up. They have the fresh headgear for the women that they make out of the local flowers and vegetation, and they absolutely love to sing. Anyway, they welcomed us. They welcomed us with open arms, came in, invited us. We got some fantastic recordings of their singing, and it is incredible. I mean, it is pounding, throbbing. They bring in the guitars. They have drums. It's really something else. It's very quite moving. And the song that Doris liked the most is the one that we put the recording up on. The hilarious thing, though, is everybody gets up and sings, and they are just so enthusiastic. The songs end, they sit down, the pastor, or whatever they called him, I'm not exactly sure, gets up and starts doing the sermon, and they all turn away and start talking to each other. And apparently he's been the pastor, he'd actually retired, and they couldn't get a new pastor, and he came back. So apparently he's completely used to being ignored because he just kept on going. We thought that was pretty good too. Anyway, they was very, very nice. And that's the pastor there in the front, saying hello to one of the people that was with us. Very nice, very colorful. The actual place, it's owned by Eleanor and Dennis. Dennis is an American, Eleanor is a French Polynesian. And I'm pretty impressed. Dennis is no spring chicken. He's 83, and he's out there in the heat, doing whatever needs to be done to keep that place running. She cooks and he maintains, and they're just really a happy couple and enjoyed running this for years and years. They've got kids that live down in LA. And I don't know, they have no plans to retire. It's pretty amazing. This is us at the family table. So they have a dining hall, if you will. And was this our last evening together? We took a group photo. But yeah, every night we would all get together at dinner, except for the operators. They had to keep operating. We'd take them a plate. And she fed us really well. I mean, it was buffet style, and fresh fish, fresh vegetables. I mean, they grow so much on the island, and it is so good. In fact, Doris was looking in a market the other day for a pomelo, which, you can find them here, but they're hard to find. But the pomelos there were these gigantic, delicious citrus pomelos. Anyhow, they have a bus. We arrived on 16th, I think, or the 15th. We got there, our flights were delayed. We were hoping to do setups on the 15th after we got there too late, so we started up the next morning. All this stuff had been shipped in advance, like I said, all the heavy stuff. We still carried some stuff, but the really heavy stuff. And another funny thing I thought was when we went to do the shipping address, we asked Dennis, what's the shipping address? He just said, Raivavae Tama, that's it. Okay, so what's the zip code? No, just Raivavae Tama. Everybody knows where that is. Just put my name on it, Dennis, Raivavae Tama. And I'm not kidding you, that was on the way bill. And when we got the freight forwarding agent in French Polynesia, they were like, oh yeah, Dennis, Raivavae Tama, of course. Everybody knows that. So the ship picked it up, dropped it off there, and he picked it up and had it waiting for us. It was awesome. That is one of the bungalows on the beachfront, which turned into the shack. And they aren't terribly large inside, as you can see. So Dennis helped us. We moved all the beds and everything out, and we started setting up 2 stations, one on each side of the room. And all of the QSOs we did were with these 2 stations. Somebody asked earlier about what some of the setups we had. We used N1MM as the logging program. I think I'd networked the two sides together so that the logs were kept in sync. It's all interfaced with the computer, so everything's automated as much as we can. It just is set up to operate pretty cleanly and smoothly. One maybe interesting side note is for several DXpeditions now, I bought a $35 GPS puck that plugs into the USB port, and then I use that to set the time on the computers so FT8's spot on time-wise, because a lot of DXpeditions you see, their clocks are all over the map. In fact, I was watching the Russians today that are in Benin, and Turner every 15 seconds, their clock was coming back at a different, and it was drifting. And I don't even know how a computer's doing this. I was really trying to puzzle that one out. It was drifting a second and a half in 15 seconds, but it was ping-ponging. It was very strange. There was a lot of antennas we brought. We probably brought too many antennas. And, you're right. It is impossible to actually have too many antennas. It's just the amount of time it takes to put them up on the expedition. The ladies were very proud. They put together the hex beam all by themselves. We ended up needing more space than we had on just his 100 and some feet of frontage. There was a building right next to the resort that was supposed to be like a community center, and it was being built with money from French Polynesia, and the church was making some donations, and there was like some landowner grant or something. Anyway, they ended up getting in some huge fight. The building's partially done. It's just rotting away. We asked the church, hey, can we set up some antennas for a donation? They said, of course. So we used all their frontage as well for antennas, including the hex beam and the step IR vertical. And you kind of see the building on the right side of that picture. So we put the big step IR vertical and the hex beam up here, and then the rest were down on the beach. I had told one, and again, team dynamics are really important. It's really important to go on these kind of trips with people you get along with. And so you try to avoid conflict as much as possible. But we were putting up the hex beam. I said, don't tie it off on that stump. That stump is not going to make it. And guess what happened? We actually had a storm blow through, and sure enough, that stump pulled right out, and the hex beam fell over and fell into the building. Amazingly, only broke one of the spreaders, and we had a spare spreader, so we were back in business in no time. But again, I'm not going to get in a fight about it, because maybe the storm didn't come, and maybe it stands the whole time. Who knows? So there's one of the VDAs laying on its side. They're about to put it up. Doris has got her hand on the top of it, and then the bottom of it. So really, it's just kind of this cross, and then you've got two wires. One's a reflector, and one's the driven element. And so it's not a vertical in the sense of a classic quarter wave vertical. It's a half wave dipole that's vertical. And these things really, so you're getting about 3 dB of gain with the dipole, with the beam aspect of it, and then you're getting all that additional gain from being around in salt water. Salt water is just magic for anything vertical. But they're single bands. That's a problem. So you got to have one for each band, and they're easy to put together, but nonetheless, you've still got 4 or 5 of them to put together, guide down, put up, so on and so forth. The 160 was actually a bit of a project to put up because it's big. It had to be guide, and it was an inverter L, and we ran the top wire over to that building next to us. And in theory, it was going to work out really well, but I'll talk about that. There's a good front view of the cottages and one of the VDAs in the foreground. Interesting, you don't actually have to have them on the beach. They just have to be within about a wavelength of the beach to get that kind of saltwater enhancement. I will divert for another little funny story. Another thing, when you're doing any kind of expedition, or if you're trying to run field day, or if you're trying to run your station SO2R, you always worry about interstation interference, especially when you're running high power. High power always makes it just even that much harder because you're getting that extra, 18, 15 dB of gain in there. So we brought along these high-powered filters made by LBS. Can't get them anymore because they're Russian. But what triggers the thought here is you see these funny little gloves that I think I bought at Costco. I just brought them along because, they don't weigh anything, and it's always good to have a pair of gloves. When we were first putting together the station, I was the first person to actually pick up a piece of coax from the antenna and a piece of coax coming out of the station. And I grabbed both ends of the coax and I got shocked. Or so I thought I got shocked, so I had to test it, so I grabbed them both again. And I definitely got shocked. And I said, what the heck? I mean, this is not supposed to happen. I'm grabbing the ground end of both of these things. So we go back, we get our voltmeter that we'd packed away, and I stick one end in the ground, and I stick the other end on the coax coming out of the shack, and it was 174 volts. And we thought about that for a minute. How could that even be? Where is that coming from? And then it suddenly dawned on us, you know what? Their power system here is really bad. But then the second question is, why isn't all of our gear blown up? And then I had to go back to engineering school and remember, oh yeah, ground's not really ground, it's just a reference. Ground could be at minus 20 volts, ground could be at plus 170 volts. Everything's going to work as long as everything's floating together. So it wasn't going to blow anything up, and luckily there wasn't enough current flowing to kill me. But needless to say, when it came to changing the filters manually, nobody wanted to be touching the coax and the filter at the same time. Hence, the gloves came in very handy as insulated gloves. We did sort this out a little bit later, not by fixing their electrical grid, but by finding a ground rod that one of the members suddenly remembered, oh yeah, there's a ground rod out there. The other funny thing that happens on expeditions is if you watch DX Summit or if you follow any of the forums that talk about DXpeditions, there's always somebody that says something about they've lost their logs. So say, for instance, you're having a hard time getting your logs uploaded like we were for a few days. The rumors start flying. They've lost their logs. All their computers blew up. They fell in the ocean. You know, it's just this incredible amount of just BS about some disaster that's befallen, and all of the QSOs are now gone. All those hard-won QSOs. Yeah, well, that didn't happen. However, we did have a log problem. It was this one. So I told you we had that one storm blow through. And so we're sitting there kind of watching, you know, everything's flapping in the wind, but nothing's falling over. And everything was pretty well anchored. And we used what's called dead men. We just took sandbags and filled them up, tie off one of the guy wires on the thing, throw it on the beach, and in a few hours it's covered in sand. I mean, nothing's going to pull it out except that log. So none of us were going to go out in the ocean and try to dissuade that log from coming through. And as it rolled through, it managed to pull down a few of the VDAs, but since they're fiberglass poles, they were fine. It's just we had to go about re-anchor them. Yeah, there's one of the fallen VDAs as we watched it slowly take them down. Yeah, and there's N6XG Walt and I contemplating the fallen VDA. What do you think we should do? Maybe we should put it back up. That's a really thoughtful picture there. Gene put in a plug for the NA4RR hex beam that the guy actually gave us a pretty good deal on, so that's the plug for it. Solid, well constructed. I got nothing bad to say about it. It survived toppling from 30 feet. I got a lot of good things to say about this thing other than its noise. That is a bulletproof solid state amplifier. I don't think there's anything you can do that will blow it up. I mean, we basically have shorted it out when it was going full output, and it tripped and didn't even skip a beat. Reset and kept going. The only problem with it is the thing is so darn loud once it gets hot, and it was warm there, and obviously there's no air conditioning in the hut, and we're running FT8 at 1500 watts. That thing, the fans on it sound like a 727 spinning up behind you. I mean, I could hear it through the headphones. It was that loud. This was the new amplifier. This is built in England. It's a really strong candidate for DXpeditioning because it weighs as about the same as a KPA 500, but it puts out 1200 watts. The particular one we took turned out to have a small flaw, a bad capacitor, but that got fixed right away. I think I've got one on order, and I plan on taking these on DXpeditions. It's a really nice amp. Even though this was a more casual style of expedition, we still took it very seriously. On prior expeditions, you always set up a schedule. I mean, you have to have an operating schedule. And so on this one, I did the operating schedule, and we do a kind of an interesting philosophy, I think. And I learned it from the guys before me. I didn't make this up. As you know, if you're doing any kind of serious DX chasing, there's really two kind of magical times of day. There's the morning gray line at sunrise, and then there's the evening gray line at sunset. And magic happens on the HF bands at those times. So that's what's designated here. It's 2 gray lines on the spreadsheet. And what you want to do is you want to give everybody a chance to experience gray line and also operating different times of day, because conditions change every hour of the day. Different bands are open, different bands are closed. And so what we do is we basically have a rolling schedule. You do a 4-hour shift. Then you've got 8 hours off, 4 hours on, 8 hours off. But what we do is that for the first 4 days or so, you're on one block. Then after 4 days, everybody rolls forward a block. So the net of it is you get a lot of great experience with the bands in different times. The downside is you're in perpetual jet lag, because you're constantly changing your body clock. Just by the time you've gotten used to one time set, you've now moved forward 4 hours, and it's just like you flew to the East Coast. I still wouldn't change it just because you get the different times of day, but it does make it harder. Does that make sense? And we just did it in 2-man teams, obviously. Now, one thing that was utterly and absolutely extraordinary about this expedition was the conditions. I don't know if you recall, but in April in May we had some of the best conditions we've had since the last solar cycle. And during that is the solar flux index during our time on the island. And it started out at 110 and it peaked at 165. And at the same time, we had almost no geomagnetic disturbances. So we had super high solar flux, and we had almost a K index of 0 or 1 the whole time. It was absolutely the most extraordinary conditions I've ever had on an expedition. But it was also just the most extraordinary conditions we've had in 10 years. So that was just an incredible piece of good luck, and it made it fun for everybody on both sides. So how did we do? Well, as in everything else in life, we like to keep stats, and on DXpeditions, we keep a lot of stats, what we care about. The number one is how many QSOs did we do? Well, we did 54,000. Our target was 50, so we're really, really happy that we did 54,000 in about 12 days. Of those 54,000s, another key metric is how many are what are called uniques. In other words, people are going to work us multiple times, but how many unique call signs were in the log? So we worked 14,277 unique call signs. I'm not going to say people, call signs, over the course of that, which represented about a 26% unique rate, which is very typical for what at least in the expeditions I've been on. It's about 25% uniques of the total. The interesting stat here, and I don't have the contrast compare other than what I can tell you, is this expedition had 49% of our QSOs as FT8. On my first expedition that I went on in 2015, that number was 0. So let's think about that. From 2015 to 2022, it's gone from 0 to half. FT8 has truly changed the hobby in so many ways, and it's changed DXpeditioning. I'm not going to say for better or for worse. I will say that as the DXpeditioner on the other end, FT8 is boring. But the positive is knowing that I'm getting to people that may not have been able to get to us any other way. So, I mean, as an activity, yeah, it's a little bit like watching grass grow. As a personal reward, knowing that you're able to work a lot of people that you couldn't work, it's fantastic. And so I think it's really opened up opportunities for a lot of people to work DXpeditions that wouldn't have had it otherwise. The other thing that's interesting to me about this is I'm a pretty avid phone operator on expeditions. I really like to run phone pileups. This is the first expedition I've ever been involved in that FT8 absolutely crushed, I'm not going to say surpassed, it crushed FT8. FT8 crushed phone, I mean. We still did a lot of phone contacts, but I mean, by and large, it was FT8. And the difference is, to me at least personally, is I could get on phone, and we publish all of our frequencies in advance. You can see it's still, the website's up, TX5N.net. We publish in advance. Here's where we're going to be. We can't say when because we don't know. But I would get on our calling frequency on phone, and I would start calling CQ, and I call CQ, and I call CQ, and I call CQ. I know the band's open because I can hear other people. Nobody's coming back to me. In prior expeditions, I mean, one CQ, and I'd just be mobbed. So I would literally have to somebody would work me, and I'd say, please, please spot us. And then we'd get spotted, and boom, everybody's all over us. On FT8, you call CQ once, boom, we're just getting mobbed. So people were there waiting for us on the FT8 frequencies. They weren't waiting for us on the phone frequencies. And for me, that's a massive shift in kind of how people are thinking about interacting with radio. We still did a ton of CW. CW is fun as an expeditioner. If you haven't learned CW, I recommend you do. It's hard, but it's fun. As far as division of parts of the world, we were pretty happy with the split. Naturally, North America was top. I mean, if you look at geographically, North America is a chip shot to French Polynesia, especially the West Coast. So we did about 43% North America. We were very happy with the 25% Europe. They were not as happy. We were very happy. They're never happy, by the way. And then we did about 30% into Asia. And again, Asia's pretty good, pretty close as well. The interesting thing about working Europe is the beam heading to North America is the same as it is to Europe. So to work Europe, we're actually shooting over North America. And the net of that is you have to ask the North Americans, stand by. I'm working Europe only now. And you know what? Americans stand by. I can't say the same about the reverse. I can't say that if I say Europe stand by, that they're going to stand by. They're probably not. So there's a whole lot to be said about you as trying to work an expedition and kind of the techniques and tactics that you use to get in the log of the DXpedition. The flip side is it very important to listen to the instructions of the DXpedition operator. If I say I'm working Europe, I mean it. If I say I'm working North America, I mean it. I'm not going to work Europe if I said North America, nor am I going to work North America if I said Europe. So it's the discipline of not only the DXpedition operator, it's the discipline of those that are trying to work the DXpedition, and it makes a massive difference. Were we able to get the recording working? Okay, we won't worry about it. I've got a little snippet that I'd record. Well, no, it's on the stick. Don't worry about it. If anybody's interested, we can play it after the fact. I've got a snippet that I'd recorded. And for some reason, I'd never done this before, but I set it up some software so I could do a really high quality recording of both sides of me running a phone pilot. So it was good quality of my and good quality of them. And it's of me running a European pilot. And it's even toward the end of the DXpedition, so, people had plenty of time to try to work us, unless they were out of town. There's a ton of reasons why people can't. But I'm picking out fragments of call signs. So there's probably 10, 15 people calling me at the same time. And I'm picking out fragments. And I picked out a fragment. I know I heard it. I mean, I was absolutely 100% sure I'd heard the fragment. I can't remember the 2 letters. But I repeated, Juliet Alpha, go. Everybody comes back. And you can't give up. I mean, you have to stick with it because if you lose control of the pileup, you're done for. So I'm back. Juliet Alpha, please. Juliet Alpha, please. And we do this 4 or 5 times. Same behavior. Just everybody keeps coming. I said, come on, guys. We're going to work the Juliet Alpha, and we're going to stay on this until I work the Juliet Alpha. Same mob again. At this time, we're about 30 seconds into this little exercise. 30 seconds doesn't sound like a lot, but in a pileup, it's actually a huge amount of time because I expect to have worked 3 or 4 people in that 30 seconds, not trying to work just one. And then finally, about 45 seconds into it, everybody finally shuts up, and you can hear the guy. And when he finally comes through, he's 5'9" in the clear. I mean, absolutely just crystal clear. It's just a really great, less than a minute snippet that just shows you on being on the other end of the pileup, how important it is for people to actually pay attention and listen. And a lot of people have said, well, they didn't understand English. I'm not using English. I'm using phonetics. So anyway, I'm not dogging on Europeans, but I'm just going to say that there are certain countries, Italy, that don't listen to the DXpedition operator very well.
Delta Lima, please. Delta Lima. Delta Lima, please. Delta Lima. Delta Lima 5, please. Delta Lima 5, Delta 59. Delta Lima 5.
Delta Lima 5, Victor Zulu.
Delta Lima 5, Victor Zulu 59.
QSN 59, thank you.
Thank you, 73, Tango X-ray 5, November.
We worked about 152 entities around the world, so we had pretty good representation of countries calling in. And our dupe rate at the end of the day, we worked about 3% dupes, which has been very, very typical of expeditions that I've been on. People aren't, we may not have uploaded to the club login or to the login time for people to see it. There's a lot of reasons why people dupe you. Some people just dupe you to dupe you. We actually have a kind of an internal secret prize that we count amongst ourselves: who's the biggest DX hog, who worked us the most times, regardless of whether it was just worked us, including dupes. And I'll just say that it was 45. It's just incredible. Gene first gave this presentation in Europe at Friedrichshafen at their big DX convention. He probably didn't say a lot of the things I just said. But he did want to point out to the Europeans, because this line is the number of QSOs we did in Europe, just how many European QSOs we did do and how successful we were. I will say one other thing is we'd had big hopes for 160 and 80. And you saw we took that big spider beam pole. We went to all the effort to put out the radial field, and it took hours to set that antenna up. We brought specialized receive antennas for 160 and 80. It took hours to set all that stuff up. After all that effort, I think on 160 looks like we made a grand total of 333 QSOs, and people were really, really dogging on us. We were getting emails of people that were very upset because we weren't trying hard enough on 160. The thing that I pointed out to Gene, because he usually is the one that intercepts these emails and responds to them, and he's very nice and polite about it, was people had forgotten what the bands behave like when the solar flux is actually good. Well, and by good, I mean high. When the solar flux is that high, the low bands get wiped out. I mean, it's just the way it is, physics. Because what happens is the layers of the ionosphere get very, very energized during the day, and the propagation on 160 is primarily carried by D layer, which is the one that, as the F layer goes away as the sun sets, the D layer is the one that starts taking over propagation, and propagation on the low bands is usually D layer propagation. When the ionosphere gets as energized as it does when the solar flux is that high, the D layer never quite comes into play. In other words, it's gotten wiped out itself because the F layer, everything's just too energized. And so I think people had just forgotten how good high band propagation gets when the solar flux is high and how bad low band propagation gets. Because for the past 5 years, that's where the action was on the low bands. Not so. If you look at our numbers on 10 and 12, to me, these blew me away. 10 meters, we did 8,500 contacts. 10 meters has been closed for the past 5 years. I mean, it was absolutely mind-blowing. I mean, we were getting people they didn't believe us. You're not there. It was phenomenal. And same with 12 meters, 8,400 on 12 meters as well. So that was a real blast on those high bands to be able to work all over the world. I mean, literally all over the world on 10 and 12 meters. And I go on and on about this because those are the most accessible bands to everybody. A 10-meter beam is small. A 10-meter dipole is small. A 10-meter vertical is small. So is 12 meters. Very accessible antennas to put up, even in HOA restricted areas, because they're small enough a lot of the time you can get away with it. And the point being is that you can get on HF and work DXpeditions with very, very little. We got emails after the fact, and I wasn't joking about the guy who threw 3 feet of wire out his window on the East Coast and worked us with 5 watts on FT8. So just because you think you don't have enough antenna, if the flux is high and the conditions are good, and you try, you can work almost anybody when conditions are right. But you don't know unless you try. So to me, that's the big part. We get fun going there to give people the opportunity to try. And of course, the big guns jump in there and they operate us in the first hour of the DXpedition. Great. They can check off their boxes and they're done. But then there's 2 weeks where we're trying to work everybody that we possibly can. So that's what I encourage you to do. There's not a lot of hands that went up that says, I tried DX. Well, here's a good reason to try it. You've got 2 expeditions on right now. One's in Marquesas, TX7, I can't remember. And then there's a Russian team that just showed up in Benin that's TY0 something, or TY0RU. Both of them are loud. And the conditions are not too bad right now. So give it a try. You know, you might just work them. Even though we did not actively solicit contributions on this expedition, we did not go out to clubs asking for money. A big part of these big DXpeditions is you have to go around and you're trying to raise money from clubs and from foundations and from individuals to help fund it. A major DXpedition is typically funded 3 ways. Out of the pockets of the DXpeditioners, so we have to put down a lot of money out of our pockets to kind of get things rolling, like reserve the ship and do all this other kind of stuff. We get about 1/3 of it from clubs and foundations like the Northern Cal DX Foundation. And then we get about 1/3 of it after the fact through QSLing. We don't really make money on QSLs, but we make money on people give us another $5 or another $10 to cover it. And like I said, these expeditions are getting extraordinarily expensive. This one, since it was us doing it, and we didn't want to be, we didn't want to have to go through the whole fundraising thing. But we were very fortunate. Our timing was really good. There had not been a major expedition on for a long, long time because of COVID. So there was I would say, a huge pent-up demand and excitement when we did get on the air. And the minute we hit the air, we, literally saw thousands of dollars of donations come in. So we really appreciate that from individuals. And we use that money to offset the shipping. We don't make money on these. I want to be very clear about this. There's no way I've made money on DXpedition. Trust me. Right, Doris? But it does help offset it a whole bunch. The other thing is corporate sponsors. Even though we didn't go after corporate sponsorship, DX Engineering, and I always throw out a huge plug for them, are so supportive. We can call Tim, the owner, K3LR, of DX Engineering and say, listen, we're going to go do this expedition. And he'll say, what do you want? That's it. We send him a list and we get a shipment. So they are just super supportive, and I encourage you, if you're going to buy stuff, go to DX, give them a try. Rig Expert, Ukrainian, they were having some challenges around that time. They were very supportive. We use Step IR, we use Radio Sport headsets, and we always point people to K6TU's propagation website for them to get a best estimate of when you will be successful working the DXpedition. Because that website allows you to plug in information about your QTH, and then he's already got information about what we're going to do. And then it prints up a nice chart that shows, okay, on 12 meters, 0300 is probably your best bet. So that's a really powerful tool to also optimize the time you have to invest to work a DXpedition, because you don't have time to sit there 24/7 and try to work it. What else? I'll throw out a plug for Tim. Tim, M0URX, is our QSL manager. He does a fantastic job. He spends incredible hours and deals with some really upset people. And really, he doesn't make any money on this either. He calls it a company and he calls it a job, but he's not making much on it. He just does it for love of the hobby. And with that, A, thank you, and B, any questions? Oh, all she said was there's going to be a write-up in November QST about TX5N. So that's cool. That's cool. Questions, comments, thoughts? Got a couple. Oh, you are first.
Me again. Mitch, I'm just curious, when you guys are on these DXpeditions, do you guys use a proprietary software for communications within the control stations?
No, we were using N1MM logger.
Okay.
Just good old free N1MM.
You just don't get the free dump of your resetting of the computer and lose all your contacts, and miraculously there they are.
Well, as the IT guy, I do daily backups onto separate media, and the way N1MM in network mode operates is every QSO on computer A gets automatically sent to computer B. So they're constantly synchronizing with each other. So a bomb would have to fall on the hut for us to lose our logs.
Is it GPS using for the timing issues to keep the clock set correctly?
That's mainly for FT8.
Okay.
The computer clock would be fine if we're just doing phone and CW. I mean, if it drifts a few seconds over the week, who cares? It's FT8 that you have to keep within a tenth. You want to keep within a tenth of a second of true time.
GPS locked. Beautiful.
Yep, GPS locked. And I run an NTP server on one of them that serves the other computers. Like in Orkney, we had 8 computers, so it kept them all in sync.
You mentioned shipping. What's the lead time on getting your 2 pallets over there with some, margin of COVID delay?
I think we sent it 2 months in advance. And a lot of that was governed, again, to your point, worried about COVID delays, number one. And number two, it had to be transferred from aircraft to the ship that only goes to that island once every 2 weeks. So we had to line it up with that ship's schedule as it pings along all the Austral Islands and makes its shipping drops. Yes, sir.
The expeditions are going on.
Yes, the question was, is there a central place to go to find what active DXpeditions are out there? Yes, there is. And his N3FK, I'll get it to you if nobody remembers off the top of their head. There's a guy that maintains a list.
Okay.
There's also an ARRL bulletin that gets sent out every week that lists what's coming up in expeditions. You can do that as well. Yes, sir. What's the smallest group that can do an expedition? 1. Doris and I went to, I guess maybe that's 2. I had Doris's support. We went to Lord Howe Island once, and I took gear and had I wouldn't call it it was more of a holiday style expedition. I operated when I felt like it, whereas to me a true expedition is you actually have a schedule, you have operators, you're making a commitment to the world that says we're going to be there 24/7.
On your FT8 software, were you working single station, single slice? How were you working that?
Good question. We were using good old WSJTX, which works fine. We were using Foxhound mode, and because we brought big amplifiers, we were running multi-streams. Depending on conditions, anywhere between 3 and 5 streams. And for those of you that don't know, the way WSJTX works in what they call Foxhound mode or multi-stream mode, is it's basically transmitting 3 to 5 signals at the same time on FT8. And the net effect of that is that you're taking your output power and you're dividing it amongst those streams. So if you had only 100 watts and you did 5 streams, each stream is only getting 20, which is why it's so important to run an amplifier, because then each stream can actually get some juice behind it. Usually 500 watts, a 500 watt amp will work pretty well with 5 streams. But here's what's confusing. It's some of the new software that's a derivative of WSJTX, like a package called MSHV, which is written by a guy in Bulgaria, I think, allows people to work multi-stream without using Foxhound. So after all this time of training people how to use Foxhound, he comes along and blows it all up, and you can work them either way. That's good and that's bad. Because then you get to expeditions like us that we're going to use that WSJT because we think it's more, stable. And then everybody's got to remember, oh yeah, I got to do Foxhound. But they're used to, like the Russians in Benin right now are using MSHV and they're doing multi-stream, but you don't have to be Foxhound to call them. You can call them with anything. It has its own set of problems. We could talk about that afterwards. A lot of subtleties with this software that is actually quite confusing for a lot of people. Yes, sir. We love getting new members. I was about to say, you need to start saving, number one, and it's not up to me only. It's got to be, it literally is kind of a team decision, especially if it's something like going to South Orkney where you're going to be on a ship and you're going to be enclosed with these people for 21 days. So, the ship ride down to Orkney is not fun because you're crossing the Magellan? Yeah, Drake Passage. You're going through the Drake Passage. And it's historically some of the roughest seas on the planet. So it's not like you're going out on the deck to get, some fresh air. You're in your bunk hoping you're not going to vomit your guts out. And then you're in a relatively small enclosed tent with these guys for 12 to 14 days, and you're in stressful conditions, and like I said, the dynamic is really, really, really important. Not saying you wouldn't fit in, just saying it's a real key aspect that a lot of people don't consider on these expeditions. And I actually had a hard time getting involved with this group. I'd talk to everybody I knew in the DXing world saying, hey, I want to go on an expedition. I want to go on an expedition. And it was 2 years before I got anybody that would even talk to me. And it was only because I knew two of the people on this team, or they knew people that knew me well enough to say, yeah, he's not going to go crazy on you. And that's no joke. These guys had taken a few people on expeditions in the past just based on like a friend of a friend kind of thing, and it didn't turn out well. One person basically wouldn't get off the ship. That's not good. You've just lost a team member the whole time. And other people just kind of like melted down. They're just, the stress of the situation. I don't know. So, yeah, it's not easy, and it's not easy. And I'm saying not easy is in the sense of it's physically and mentally challenging. Not saying you're not up for it, but just that's kind of the thought process. And save some money. And get permission from your significant other. They need to be very supportive.